Alright, so let's talk about it like this. We're going to talk about the setup. And the setup for me is more than just how you set your arch, you set your feet, your approach towards the lift. What I find a lot of times, lifters miss the lift before they touch the platform. And the reason why I say that is because not too many people are going to just go out on the platform and YOLO lifts without knowing that they could do it, right? You have, like, let's say for instance in training, I used to do it when I first started. I made bench press 517, 519 in the gym on gym plates, touch and go, and then get in a competition and just think that the week that I rested is going to give me enough in order for me to be able to make that bench in competition on competition day. And it doesn't work that way. You know, I want people to start having a better setup, meaning their approach, how you go about the numbers that you're hitting. I do that through my wave system, and my wave system is pretty much will have you set up for success. You'll know where your ranges are and what you will be able to do, especially with the proper rest, based on how much volume work that we do in the 6-wave protocol. But I'm not even going to talk about that part. I'm going to talk about standing on the platform. When you get there, there's several things you should do in a competition anyway. The first thing you do is introduce yourself to the handoff guy. Communicate with them. Talk to them. Tell them how you want the bar. Like, do you want an easy handoff? Do you want a strong handoff? Do you want them to pick up and put out? Or do you want them just to pick straight up and you bring the weight out? These are conversations that should happen prior to you even attempting your first attempt in the meet. And if you find out who the liftoff person is before you actually hit the platform, try to chop it up with them. Get a good communication going. What I always, and I learned this from LS. LS would get out to the platform, introduce himself to all the spotters, dap them up, get good energy going in the group before he takes his attempt. He gets clear understanding and communication with them. There's one thing that you can do, and this works for the USAPL and IPF, is tell them to give you your handoff and get out the way. Because in the USAPL and the IPF, they're not going to give you your start command until that spotter leaves the platform. And if he hangs around a little bit longer, that's going to be a longer time you have at the top where you're just having to hold. So I always try to communicate what I want from the handoff person so they know not to linger. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, as soon as you give me that weight, I'm going to get off the platform so I can get this lift started. You know what I'm saying? And for the most part, they understand, because sometimes they hand off and they're like handing off a little bit scared. And that happens when you're a huge bencher. When I bench press, you know, it's going to be 600 pounds with 5 reds on each side. The handoff people sometimes are extremely scared because they don't want you to get hurt, and they've also never handled that much weight. So you have to be very firm with what you want from them and what you expect from them. And that would help you out so much. Just getting the communication between the spotters on the platform. Number 2, in this particular instance, once you sit down on the platform, make sure you are not underneath the rack too far. What I've learned and noticed over the years, so many lifters miss lifts because they're extremely sloppy. I'm talking about they're rushing. You have an entire minute from the time you they say the bar is loaded. You have 1 minute, and to put it in perspective, you could run around an entire track one time. If you're fast, right? You can run around a track one time in 1 minute. So you have all day to make sure your feet are set. You have to make sure you have time to make sure that you're sitting and you've placed yourself in the correct position on the bench. Make sure that the bar is even, or how you like to take the weight. Also, make sure the weight is correct. A lot of times they'll misload the bar. These are mistakes that you can avoid if you just do these little checklists before you take the weights. Also, there are things on the platform that are there to help you, and a lot of times I've noticed lifters do not take advantage of this, and this is especially coming in the USAPL and the IPF. We have to have our feet flat. We have to have our heads down. So there are certain elements of the bench press that are just what they are. You should always make sure your bar heights are correct. Make sure your safeties are correct. And for God's sakes, so many big guys, and I'm probably not in this predicament as a bigger guy, but these guys are huge, big stomachs, short legs. They're benching heavy weight and they refuse to get foot blocks. Many of these guys don't have the flexibility to really get in a very tight position, so they wind up sacrificing other elements of the bench so that they can bench press comfortably. If they just went and got a 1, 2, or 3-inch block, that would help them be more stable on the bench press and also more comfortable. But a lot of times I think people don't want to use the blocks because it does take a little, it kind of feels a little special a little bit. So I can see how some guys may not want it, but there are at least 40 to 50% of the bigger lifters that I see, you can tell that their legs are barely engaged with the floor, and it's mostly due to their size. But they can fix that or correct that if they utilize the blocks, and they don't. One of the next things, make sure that you take the time to actually get the proper rack heights. You'll see a lot of times guys wind up having the rack heights too high, and they wind up ungluing or becoming disconnected with the weights, and it messes up their entire sets. And when that happens, you wind up seeing guys hitting the rack a lot of times. That is something that could be avoided. You should never be in a situation where you're technically hitting the rack. That should never happen, but it happens over and over again, especially with the more explosive lifters. A lot of these guys are very strong, but their energy doesn't go in the right direction when they're benching. They're just pressing, but they don't have a gauge or a width for their bar path. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the video. But take the time to move your head from the top of the bench forward. Get your eyes even with the bar. And if you're able to do that, that means, one, you're going to need a strong handoff. Now, I'm able to do it in training because I have these monos, and the monos allow me to be able to adjust the height, and I can unrack without losing my tightness, and I have a perfect handoff every time. But in competition, that bar should technically be behind your eyes. And what I've noticed is a lot of people are taking the weight with their eyes even with the bar, and they're doing that so they can see the weight. And what happens is you wind up getting trapped between the bar and the post, and you see a lot of guys hitting the rack. So it doesn't make sense to get a lift disqualified because you were strong enough but you weren't smart enough to get away from the rack. And I see this far too often. Next up, you should know the judging. You should understand how the judges look at each lift. You should be watching how the judges observe the lifters. There's a technique that a lot of smaller lifters are using now, and it requires them picking their butts up off the bench as they're unracking. A lot of them do it with a self-unrack. And at first, I believe that when they would self-unrack, they get the weight, their butt is still in the air. Then they set their butt. And what happens in the USAPL, I thought it might be to your advantage to do that, because once your butt touches, if they were to give you that start command, then it would be a worthwhile thing to do, to add more time to your hold time. But what I've noticed is it seems like it pisses the judges off that they're having to wait for you to set your butt down. So in a normal situation, when you unrack, they have a judge to the left, a judge to the right, and the head judge. And the side judges are making sure that your feet are flat and your butt is on the bench and you're stable. And once you're stable, they give the hand signal. Each one gets the hand signal from the left to the right. Then the head judge tells you start. And then when you finish, you press the weight and rack. That ends the lift. But I see too many people with these routines where they're, feet up on the bench, they're rolling up on their foreheads, getting into these weird positions. And it seems like they're having to hold the weight much, much longer. And me as a huge bencher, I'd much rather have a longer pause command than me holding the weight at the start. I don't care if I have to hold it at the end. But at the start, you're just draining me. You're draining me. So I want to get the start command as fast as possible. All right. Next part of this. You can ease your start command and get a faster start command if you do one simple thing. And I've learned this more so in the USAPL than I even did in the IPF. Wear flat shoes, a consistent flat shoe. Like I wear a heeled powerlifting shoe. The shoe is completely flat from toe to heel. And what I've seen is that the guys who are trying to be super fashionable, like wearing the Air Jordans or Yeezys or whatever that they're doing, they're getting called for or red lighted because their heels aren't on the ground. And some of these shoes have weird designs. I'd much rather take that out of the situation, go with a pure flat shoe to where my feet are stable, my feet are flat. There's no indecision if it's making contact, it's for sure, and I get a faster command. So I much rather, instead of trying to be super stylish wearing the basketball shoe that may have a rounded edge to it or front or back, just go with a super flat shoe. That'll help you get a faster start command. Trust me, right? Then also, platform awareness. When you go to these competitions, you're typically in the USAPL, especially down south, you're going to use an ER rack, you may use a Texas strength rack, you may even use a rogue rack. For the most part, unless you change your hand grip, you should always write down your numbers, right? So this could also speed up some of the initial time of you checking in. Is that if you're going to be lifting on a rack like this is a noble rack, which we don't use in competition, but if we're using, let's say, an ER, I have the ER numbers that I've used with my my ring finger on the rings. I know all my numbers. I know my rack heights. I know my everything already. I already have it programmed. And every rack is different. The Ivanko rack is there are different numbers for your safeties as well as your rack height. So you always take this into consideration what equipment you're lifting on. Also, beforehand, if you can find out what racks they'll be using in competition, that'll also help you out so that you can start getting some practice on that equipment beforehand. Because I can tell you this, a lot of times we use those old ER racks and they're creaky, they're very loose, they're a completely different lift than lifting on a Lico. It's a different lift. Lifting on a Texas Strength System bench is a different lift. The road bench is a whole different lift. So if you can find out what equipment they're going to be using before the competition, that also will help you out a great deal. Let's see what else we got here. We have equipment that you'll be using on the platform is also very important. Like I said, I use shoes. I use a Olympic squat shoe. I wear a mouthpiece. I wear a headband. I wear a belt. I have my singlet. My shirt. Shirt is also very important. So these are the 6 things that oh, 7. Your socks. Your socks are important as well, especially with the bench press. Feet have to be flat, so you want to make sure you have a sock that doesn't slip and slide inside of the shoe. That is something that a lot of people do not take great attention and notice to. Please make sure that you're using stuff that's not going to move around. Your shirts. I like wearing shirts that have tight sleeves. Don't wear an oversized shirt when benching. Wear something that's going to be fitted. It may actually help you stabilize yourself a little bit with a snugger, safer shirt. Use a shirt that doesn't have any nylon in it, because you know you can get disqualified, so it'll be 100% cotton or whatnot. Just be very mindful of what you're doing. Try using those same garments when you're training, so that there's not a huge change in protocol when you get to the competition. Now, the one thing that I do, and you see a lot of smaller lifters worry and concern about, is the pad that they're using on the bench. Are they using a fat pad by Rogue, or because Rogue has a competition fat pad that is, I believe, 12.5 inches, and their training fat pad, or the original fat pad by Donnie Thompson, is 14.5 inches. Now, I've had all of them. I had the training fat pad, which I've been using now for 7 years, which wound up being, I say, one of the top 3 investments that I've made in powerlifting. Outside of my rack, calibrated plates, and the fat pad were probably the things that have helped me with my benching more than anything. Let's see what else. You get the fat pad, train on it. And what you see, some people, their benches doesn't carry over that great, because depending on how wide you are, the competition fat pad will have less effect on you. Like for me, I'm a bigger guy, so the width is close enough to a standard to where if I'm able to bench a weight on the fat pad competition, I'm not going to have a problem with the competition pad at all. Now, the bigger pad that's 14.5 inches, I find the extra support that I'm given through all the reps that I do have a great carryover that is much greater than using the standard competition pad, no matter what it is. It could be a Vanco, it could be a Lico, it could be whatever. I translate my benches and training to competition just the same. So I don't get caught up in that too much. But if you're a smaller lifter, you may have to do a little more research with how you get in and out the hole with the bigger or smaller pad. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first portion of Bench School, the 6th Wave, and be on the lookout for part 2. Like I said, I'm probably going to wind up shuffling this around a little bit, because I am going to give a little bit more information, but some of it's going to cross in other sectors. But I hope you guys enjoyed this particular part of the video. Until next time, later.